Today is the 5th day of this February 1985 7-day retreat. And today we will talk about the fear human beings have of dying, it doesn't seem that animals have that kind of fear of dying, even though animals have a tremendously vital instinct to survive, to live and to survive. But once an animal is sick or about to die, from observing, one does not know, of course, what goes on in the animal itself. There doesn't seem to be any thrashing about in anxiety. It was not long ago we walked through a deep canyon, and on one of the ledges right next to that very rapid stream, there was lying a deer, a rather young deer, which apparently had crashed from the rim down onto the ledge, and as we were coming by, it was trying to get up, and one could see that 2 legs were broken. I was trying again and again, and always falling down, trying and falling down. We walked on to the end of the gorge, and quite a bit later we came back, and a little bit lower downstream, again on the ledge, was that same deer. We assumed it had gotten into the stream by these efforts of getting up, and then was swept onto another ledge. And this time it was not quite lying, it was sort of sitting there with great poise and dignity. One can say you're projecting this, but this is what it looked like, not moving anymore. It was alive still. And then some people came, they were going to shoot it, because it was impossible to rescue it. These were the rangers of the park. Yesterday we talked at great length about the thought, the idea of me, which is so deeply imprinted in our consciousness, in our brain. I usually use the word image, but in talking to a couple of people, it turns out that some people don't have exactly visual images of themselves, but thoughts and ideas. It's the same thing. Sometimes somebody says, I have such a hard time seeing what you mean by image. Maybe this is the reason, that one is not visually seeing oneself, but if one observes and watches, there are thoughts and ideas about oneself, what one is, what one has been and will be. this feeling of me, or the feeling of self, of I, or ego, whatever you may call it, it is those ideas which are memories and past experiences, anticipations in the future, but it is also everything that we have accumulated. Material things, family, friends, this all constitutes this feeling of I. One's reputation, fame, if one has fame, or the opposite, bad reputation. The ideas one cherishes, the institutions one loves, feels identified with, religious beliefs, one's favorite ideology, political ideology or economic ideology, one's plans for the future, where one is going to go, what one is going to do, all of this constitutes this feeling of me. Me is in the middle of it all. But all of that is me. And maybe we did not emphasize it yesterday, but what goes with this feeling of me is great attachment. Attachment to the idea of oneself, maybe to the looks of oneself, to one's talents, and all that has been mentioned. Attachment to it. Attachment, what does it mean? A feeling, I have to have that. I need that. Unquestionably, I need that. It's mine. Without that, I cannot live happily or properly. And with attachment goes fear, fear of losing. Please, one can see all of that now and as one lives. Actually, attachment is already an effect of fear, the fear of being lonely, miserable, maybe not liked, helpless, and therefore attaching to something and somebody, or lots of things and lots of somebodies. And it is so clear that if attachment happens because of fear, it carries with it fear. Fear of losing. Dependency. What will happen to me if I won't have this person or if this image gets threatened, this idea of myself is in jeopardy, is being attacked. What will I be? All of this goes on in thought, in the imagination. Fear of what will happen if what I cherish most or cling to most will not be there anymore. I'll lose it. It's an interesting phenomenon that most of the things we're afraid of happen in thought, in imagination. I did this once for myself, having been ever since I can remember, maybe due to the frightening circumstances of the times at which I lived as a child, times of war and persecution, always being afraid. Of this happening, losing my mother, losing my father, losing the house, or brother and sister, losing a place to be, and of course dying, being destroyed by a bomb or being sent to concentration camp. All these fears were there all the time. And then there were other fears. One was a fearful person. Human beings are fearful persons unless one finds an escape, an activity which so absorbs one that these fears are held at bay or are repressed altogether. But one time, not too long ago, working so much with people in fear, I sort of went as much as was possible over the memory of this life, trying to count up what really happened of all the things that I was always dreadfully afraid of, and I could hardly find anything. Nothing ever happened. And yet the life was pervaded by fear. And all of its, we went into that at great detail, how the body responds dutifully, programmed to each thought. Because the brain is there to guide the organism to survive, to run away from danger, or to fight if running is impossible. And this the brain does when a fear, danger signal comes in, and the body responds. Whether the signal that comes in signals real danger or imagined danger, the body and the brain will respond in the same way, which means our physical system is constantly churned up. And no activity happens that is supposed to take care of all this preparation, namely running, or, well, we do run a lot these days. I've mentioned it quite frequently. It makes so much sense why people enjoy so much to run. To run off all of this stored up tension and adrenaline that gathers during the day by wanting to run away from that office or from the boss or the people with whom one works and whom one can't stand. If one had a fist fight, one would be fired, very likely. Mention the fear of losing what one is attached to or dependent on for dear life. There is this mental physical feeling that without this I could not go on. And yet at the same time there is a deep desire to continue as what one thinks, feels, sees and knows that one is and has been. one's life, these memory images or thoughts that we have about our past life make up a continuity, and this continuity we project into the future, and we want it to continue unless we're so totally desperate and hopeless that one takes one's life. But we don't want to go into that right now. That would be a special problem to look at separately. But most human beings want to continue in their thoughts. It is a thought process, wanting to continue forever. Particularly at a time that one is still healthy. If one is very old or very sick, then other thought processes may take over, of not wanting to go through with this being artificially kept alive. But as long as there is a fair measure of health, human beings want to continue, and that is a process of thinking. Look at it, see it. The feeling of oneself, the thoughts, images of oneself one wants to continue. And, of course, we went into that at the beginning, not just me, but my possessions, my friends, my hobbies, my trips and walks to the places that I love, the good food I enjoy, all that I want to continue forever. Recently, somebody came to the office and brought a tape that had been taken unbeknownst to the child while the child was having a conversation with his father. Father sort of had a tape recorder there and turned it on and told the boy that this was for something or other. And he just talked with this 5-year-old child, starting talking about school. And at one point, the boy, totally unprompted by his father, said that he didn't want to die, that he wanted to live forever. And remember exactly all he said. It was very interesting, because it meant that at that tender age there was formed in the mind the feeling of I, the feeling of time, the future, forever, and this feeling of continuation, wanting to live forever, not wanting to die. Father didn't ask him what he thought death was. Very often this is a mute subject between parents and children. If parents have not really thought deeply about this whole thing, by thinking deeply I mean not just going by what the religious or other traditions have inculcated into them, but thought freely about death and dying, then one sort of hedges around it when the children bring it up. One doesn't quite know what to say, or else one gives the religious, or whatever one believes, explanation. What to a thinking human being does it mean to die? Here as we sit right now, what does it mean to die? as this question is asked, as one asks oneself, what do I mean when I say I'm going to die? And what are the feelings that come up in connection with that thought? Or what do I mean when I think I don't want to die? I'm afraid of dying. What is one afraid of? At this point, doesn't thought and imagination continue? To think, to feel out, or to imagine what this dying could possibly be. I know as a child, thinking of dying, it was always like being alive and yet in a grave, or in a casket and being buried or burned. But since there was a live brain thinking, one sort of transported this feeling of aliveness into the thought of death. So the feeling was that of being buried alive. It never dawned that death may mean no thinking, no imagination, the ending of that, and therefore unthinkable, unimaginable, and therefore not possibly tackable or dealable with through the brain. Continuing, one sees oneself continuing. Maybe getting older, one doesn't think of all the creaky joints that come with it. Not just creaky, but achy. Although one may, right now being young, have achy joints. Sitting here for the 5th day doesn't have necessarily to do with age. One thinks of everything that is now to continue, and that one doesn't want to end. And the thought of ending brings pain, anxiety, just as the thought of losing one's lover or what one is most attached to, of losing it, having to give it up, causes pain, sorrow, anxiety. Still linked with the thought of me, there's a lot of self-pity that comes into that. We talked about that yesterday. And the mind, the brain, that is preoccupied with fear, fear of losing, fear of being abandoned, or fear of dying. That brain that is continuously occupied with it, unless forcibly distracted from those thoughts, escaping from them here and there, but then they crop up again. Wears out over this worry, over this anxiety, and continuity of thought and imagination about fearful things to happen. Fear of aging. People come to me talking about the fear of aging, and there's already a repetitiveness to that thought and the way it is expressed and the way the fear comes out, there is already aging going on just because one is afraid of aging. Do you see what I mean? This constant preoccupation of the brain with what we're afraid of, with what may happen to us, is just, what is the word? Grinding on this most delicate of instruments. It loses its sensitivity to perceive and attend freely without the burden of grinding thought about the future. But to come back to what we were touching upon a while ago, can thought, can thinking possibly know death, dying? Or does one see clearly that dying is the absence, is the ending of thinking, and therefore thinking can never capture dying, make it something that it can know and therefore deal with? That's the frustration of thought, that it cannot deal with this thing of dying, that it is really thoroughly, completely unknowable. And maybe if thought cannot conquer something or grasp it, it also produces anxiety throughout the body. Because thought always wants to make us feel safe. That's why we give ourselves so many explanations all the time. One hears a strange noise and immediately one wants an explanation for it. Maybe justifiable. One may, at night, if there's a strange noise at the door, maybe worthwhile looking there, whether somebody has broken into the house. Or maybe worthwhile not going to look. My husband and I constantly differ on this. He wants to look, I want to stay put. So I stay put and he looks. But this is something to observe, how we almost continuously, perpetuously give ourselves explanations. It's a habit, and the habit itself habits give a sense, most of the time a false sense of security, because we don't have to think. We can just go with, well, it can be a thinking habit, but we don't have to explore and investigate directly. But explanations satisfy, even though very often the explanation doesn't hold. One doesn't examine it that far. But for some reason, it gives a certain sense of security to be given or give oneself explanations. One becomes attached to explanation-giving institutions. Traditions, religious traditions, which explain what will happen after death, which may be holding out hope for some continuity after death. Why can't thought realize that death is not explainable, knowable, thinkable, and totally give up doing what is impossible to do? Dying, and I'm not talking now at dying at the end of this life, it hasn't come. When that comes, one meets it like any other thing, any other event. So all one can do is meet it. The more directly, the better. The more in thought, the worse. But is it possible, as one lives, from day to day, and right now we're in the midst of a retreat, to die to this compulsion to think? Think about oneself, one's past, one's future, one's security, one's delights, pleasures, fears. Is it possible to die to all that? Realizing that all this is just imagination, habit, seeking a false sense of security away from fear or pain. There may be a pain in the back, and immediately thought sort of takes over to take one away from that pain. And it works. Like one person says, it works like a drug. You start thinking and then you don't feel that pain so much. Can one die to this compulsion, to this habit to think pleasurable things, fearful things, and face what's actually there without knowing what it is? Really not knowing, not employing thought to give these explanations to which one is so attached, but which don't hold. They're just figments of the imagination. You may say, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you mean. But you can watch it yourself. How rather than face either pain, fear, or a feeling of nothingness, despair. One person said after one talk, boy, you really laid it on heavy. Everything felt as bleak as it never looked for me before. It's good. Face that bleakness. Don't start building up the stuff again which has just been shattered. Remain with that shatteredness without building it up again in the imagination, and face what one is left with. Maybe nothing. One has never faced nothing. No thing that one knows or explains or imagines in the future it'll get better. If thoughts do come, and they do come, if they're there, not to make a problem out of it, but not to jump on the bandwagon, to escape from what is there. Which means very subtle attention to how thought is used to escape, to explain, or to take one away into fantasy land. What does it really mean to be with what's real, what is a fact, what's actually there, without knowing it, without labeling it, or making it into a thought thing again? This is this work of attending, of energy gathering nowhere except in not knowing where to go or what to do, because all we know what to do is to think about what to do. But that goes around in loops. as many people have found out in this retreat, how thinking just loops and loops and loops. There's never anything new, it's always the same. And that is what continuity is. It's always the same, even though a little bit change here and there, but fundamentally always the same thing continuing, namely memory, self, ideas about the future, time. Can there be an ending to that process? Wonder about it. And don't say yes or no. Questions are never asked here to say yes it can or no it can't, but to leave that question alive so that something sort of rallies within to find out. But not through thinking. One doesn't know how to find out. People ask me, tell me how to do this. How I know I'm doing things wrong, but how can I do it right? Please tell me. But why should I tell anybody? There is no how. There's only not knowing. How do you not know? I don't know. It's a state of mind that does not escape or expect or want, but is open to what actually is happening, and on guard against immediately explaining it, giving it a name, reacting to it. When that happens, putting that aside and wondering. We've talked about listening outwardly, inwardly, not to identify, to make oneself safe. If I know it's this, then I feel a little safer, but that's all illusion. We're not one iota more safe just because we think we know something. Sometimes it's described as taking a leap. But that so quickly can become an idea again, and then one wonders, how can I take that leap? Or I should take that leap, which is thought. It's not a leap. It's the same thing, thought going on, trying to represent to itself what to do or what it's doing. What is dying? The truth is, I don't know. And I can't know. That's the beauty of it. It's not knowable. It's the ending of knowing. Not the ending of this. That ends when the time comes. Which may be now, tomorrow, who knows? Why burden the mind with that? When in the springtime, when the apple blossoms are out, if one can picture it in the mind, one may want them to be there forever, but they're not. They're there for a few days. And a pink and white apple blossom has to totally end for there to be an apple. Two of them don't go together. The blossom has to be done with, finish, end. And the apple has to break open for a seed to come out. Can't continue as a whole apple. The seed would never come out. And the seed, if it drops on the ground, it doesn't continue being a seed. It has to end being a seed for some sprout to come up or roots to grow down. In nature we can see that demonstrated all over. For something new to be, something old ends. Painlessly, effortlessly. Painlessly, I mean no resistance. It is a most natural process. For renewal, there has to be ending. And this is verifiable within oneself. So one asks, can attachments end? So something new can come into being in this human mind? Attachment to self and all the accumulations of self. Which doesn't mean running away from home, giving away all one's furniture. It takes very subtle and honest and alert examination whether there is attachment and what attachment is and what its consequences are. And to question whether attachment can end, whether there can be a living free from attachment in the midst of human beings, not away on a mountain or in a cave. Then one may be attached to one's idea of being a hermit or whatever. Attachment is not broken by physically removing oneself from what one is attached to. Attachment is a mental process. Albeit with its physical accompaniments. And this is not an exercise of will. I must break my attachments. We've all been through that. It comes from completely different quarters. I think one can understand that if there is no attachment, there cannot possibly be any fear of death. And there may be possibility of constant renewal of the human mind and of human relationship. We will end here for today.